this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities of sovereignty, which have now passed to my beloved daughter.
What was expected to be just another routine palace announcement became something far more significant. King Charles signed a law that reshaped the future of the crown. The document did not remove Prince William from the line of succession. Instead, it reinforced his path and formally established William and Catherine as the monarchy's future ruling partnership. A single signature settled years of uncertainty, surprised the nation, and forced the entire royal household to face a future that had suddenly become official. Before we look at what this means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an update. After his advisors left, Charles remained alone with the document resting before him. He read the final paragraph twice, tightened his grip on the pen, then paused. The Royal Succession and Crown Continuity Act, a fictional law describing how authority would pass safely from one reign to the next, did more than confirm William as the future king. It also placed Catherine beside him as the future queen and opened confidential briefings, major crown decisions, and emergency planning to them before the throne changed hands. Britain would no longer rely on tradition alone during a crisis. At the same time, the king was preparing the institution for the day he would no longer lead it. Camilla watched quietly from across the room. She understood the meaning before the ink reached the page. William and Catherine would become the institutional center of palace life, while the current queen's influence gradually narrowed. The king signed, set down the pen, and remained silent. His decision secured the future, but it also acknowledged the ending waiting ahead. Triumph and loss filled the same room. Charles rejected a routine palace statement and instead ordered a televised national address, believing ordinary words could not carry the weight of this decision. Staff moved quickly, but he gave one instruction. William must receive the sealed document before the public heard anything. William opened the envelope beside Catherine. He read the clause describing their expanded duties, then gently placed his hand over hers. He felt the honor, but the cost arrived just as quickly. Their time as parents, partners, and individuals had suddenly become smaller. Catherine met his eyes without speaking, and he understood the fear beneath her. A single telephone call changed everything before the crown had even arrived. King Charles wanted William at the palace immediately, with no aides, secretaries, or witnesses. But before father and son could meet behind closed doors, William and Catherine had to absorb what the king's signature had taken from them and what it had placed upon their shoulders. To the public, William and Catherine seemed ready for this moment from the day they married. Behind palace walls, however, the reality was far more difficult. The new law did not simply promise them a crown someday. It accelerated their transformation from parents and senior royals into the central figures of the monarchy. Every decision, every absence, and every private fear would now carry consequences for the institution itself. Catherine sat with the document open before her while William remained nearby, unable to escape the weight of what his father had set in motion. The prince had spent his adult life preparing to inherit the crown, yet this felt different. He was no longer simply the heir waiting for a distant future. He had become an active constitutional partner, sharing responsibility for state matters, emergency planning, and decisions once kept almost entirely within the sovereign's control. That shift placed real authority in his hands before he became king, while removing the last safe distance between his family and the throne. Catherine read the same page again and quietly asked what it would mean for George, Charlotte, and Louis. Her voice remained steady, but her concern was unmistakable. The Princess of Wales was no longer being viewed only as a supportive royal figure. She was being prepared as the future queen, and her judgment, conduct, and ability to protect the family would help shape the next reign. William admitted he had always known the crown would one day be his, but he had never expected Charles to formalize the transition while still carrying the visible burden of kingship. He felt honored by the trust, unsettled by the speed, and strangely conflicted about accepting greater authority while his father continued to rule. Catherine reached for his hand, but the next clause made them both pause. The law granted them access to weekly sovereign briefings, national continuity files, and confidential plans for the future structure of the royal household. Then she noticed the phrase repeated throughout the document: joint continuity leadership. Charles was not simply training his son to reign. The king was making Catherine essential to the survival of the monarchy, ensuring that William would never stand alone when pressure closed around him. The prince shut the folder and looked at her with sudden certainty. A crisis had to come first before a law this significant could ever exist. At some point in the recent past, King Charles had witnessed something serious enough to abandon the old belief that tradition alone could protect the succession. The answer could be traced back to a private royal ceremony months earlier, a moment so tense that those present would later see it as the true point of no return. The law did not begin in Parliament or at the king's desk. Its real beginning came during a ceremony the public barely noticed. At a private investiture in Windsor Castle, an unexpected breakdown in royal coordination revealed how heavily the monarchy depended on one aging sovereign. What happened inside that room deeply unsettled Charles, tested William, and convinced the king that the future could no longer depend on tradition alone. Months earlier, Charles had gathered senior military representatives, Commonwealth officials, and members of the royal household for a private Windsor investiture. An investiture is a formal ceremony where the monarch presents honours, medals, or official appointments. William and Catherine attended because several long-term royal patronages were expected to pass to them in the future, yet neither had any written authority to step in if the monarch suddenly could not continue. That weakness had remained hidden for years. Then Charles stopped. In the middle of the official proceedings, the king lost his place and fell silent. An equerry, a senior royal aide responsible for assisting the sovereign during formal duties, stepped forward, but William reached his father first. The prince placed a steady hand near Charles's arm, guided him to a chair, and completed the remaining presentations, with Catherine standing beside him. She continued the ceremony without hesitation, helping calm the room while officials waited for direction. Charles recovered, but the impact reached far beyond a moment of embarrassment. Behind closed doors later, he admitted the intervention had been necessary. His voice remained steady, but every word reflected the pain of a father seen relying on his son before the entire room. William refused to describe it as weakness. He told Charles the real danger was a system that expected the heir to act during a crisis, while giving him no clear legal authority. Catherine added that several officials had frozen because no written transition process existed. For nearly 3 minutes, ceremony, government protocol, and royal command had no undisputed center. The king listened without answering, but that night he requested every file on regency, succession, continuity, and the constitutional authority of the Prince of Wales. A regency is the legal arrangement used when a monarch cannot perform royal duties, while succession determines who inherits the crown. The foundation of the new law came from those documents, but not everyone welcomed the proposal. One member of the family resisted it from the very beginning, and that disagreement would soon erupt behind palace walls. The Windsor incident inspired the legislation, but the confrontation that followed revealed who feared the future and who was ready to protect it. The meeting happened without cameras, applause, or ceremonial smiles. Charles gathered William, Catherine, and Camilla in a private drawing room and placed the draft law on the table before them. There were no advisors and no courtiers to soften the discussion. For the first time, the 4 people closest to the throne faced what the succession truly meant, and who might lose influence once the future became legally protected. Charles opened the folder and explained that the law would not weaken his authority. He would remain sovereign, but the proposed structure would allow William and Catherine to act immediately during illness, emergency, or constitutional disruption. A constitutional disruption is a crisis that interrupts the normal exercise of royal and state duties. The change mattered because the Windsor incident had exposed a dangerous gap between responsibility and legal authority. William listened without interrupting, aware that his father was offering extraordinary trust while placing duties upon him that could no longer be delayed or declined. At last, Camilla asked whether the law would reduce the role of the current queen. Her voice remained composed, but Catherine sensed the concern beneath it. Once William and Catherine received formal authority, the center of palace influence would naturally shift, and the Queen Consort understood what that could mean for her own position beside Charles. Catherine answered carefully. She explained that the law was not intended to replace anyone, but to prevent confusion whenever the country required immediate leadership. Camilla challenged that explanation. She warned that institutions often used the word continuity when they were really describing a transfer of power. The room fell silent after those words. Charles slowly pushed back his chair, placed both hands on the table, and made it clear the decision was his alone. William watched the monarch choose the future of the crown over peace inside his own family, while Catherine remained still beside him. Another warning had reached Charles long before the law was finalized. Government advisors delivered a constitutional assessment showing that the existing succession arrangements contained dangerous delays during a sudden national emergency. William asked whether the proposal had already been approved in principle. His father looked directly at him and replied that the final legal process had already begun. This was not a consultation. It was a notification. Camilla stood before the discussion ended. She glanced at Charles one last time, then walked out without another word. The sound of the closing door carried more weight than any argument. Only after she had gone did the king turn back to William and Catherine. He warned that opposition inside the palace would be minor compared with the political resistance waiting outside. The family had responded with emotion, but the next battle would be fought through constitutional authority, legal wording, and the hidden machinery that shapes how much power a future king may exercise. A royal signature may appear absolute, but no modern monarch changes succession alone. Behind Charles's decision stood constitutional lawyers, government ministers, Commonwealth consultations, and one difficult question. What would happen if the crown faced a sudden crisis before William had the legal authority to respond? The king's boldest move was not taking greater control. It was persuading the entire system that delay had become more dangerous than change. Charles entered a late-night briefing with the final draft waiting before him, and the weight of decades resting on every page. Constitutional advisors had worked alongside senior ministers and representatives from the realms that shared the monarch, ensuring the new succession framework could not be dismissed as a private family matter. Those realms are countries that recognize the same sovereign as head of state. William would remain the heir, but would gain defined continuity powers, while Catherine would receive a protected advisory and public leadership role directly connected to the future reign. One lawyer asked whether the clause involving Catherine should be softened to avoid political resistance. The king removed his glasses, looked down at the page, and answered that William must never carry the monarchy alone. That sentence settled the argument, but it deepened his private pain. Charles had waited most of his life to become sovereign, yet the law most closely linked to his reign might be remembered for preparing the country to move beyond him. From William's perspective, the burden felt completely different. He feared that accepting greater authority would make him seem impatient, as though he were reaching for a throne his father still occupied. Catherine challenged that concern. She reminded him that refusing out of guilt would leave the country exposed and diminish the meaning of Charles's sacrifice. The future queen understood that duty sometimes required acceptance instead of hesitation. The final document included an emergency provision allowing William to assume designated crown functions if temporary incapacity interrupted the king's work. Designated crown functions are specific royal duties legally assigned during a crisis, preventing confusion over who may act and when. A confidential schedule went even further. It reorganized planning teams, communication staff, and national programs around William and Catherine, quietly building the structure of the future court before the next reign began. Once Charles signed, sealed instructions moved through the palace within hours. Offices shifted. Staff reported through new chains of command. Familiar access disappeared. The legal changes had been approved quietly, but their human impact became visible the moment palace routines changed, and everyone realized where the new center of royal authority now stood. The law was barely public before the palace began to transform. Offices were reassigned, briefing routes changed, and invitations that once required the king's approval started passing through William's team. Catherine also received files previously withheld from every consort-in-waiting. To the nation, the announcement sounded like careful preparation. Inside the royal household, however, it felt as though an invisible line had been drawn. William's office gained authority over long-term state ceremonies, Commonwealth visits, and emergency royal representation, giving him greater responsibility during times of national need. Catherine also received a permanent place in continuity meetings, covering family welfare, patronage strategy, and the public responsibilities of the next generation. Her role mattered because the future queen would no longer be briefed after decisions were made. She would help shape them. Camilla entered her private office, expecting the familiar red briefing box on the table. Instead, it was gone. An aide quietly explained that the confidential papers had been redirected under the new arrangements. The queen stared at the empty space before dismissing him with measured politeness. She did not raise her voice, but the loss was unmistakable. Camilla had helped Charles steady the monarchy through years of pressure, and now the institution was learning to function without her. Worse, the king had personally approved every change. Partnership had always been William's vision, but now it had become his responsibility. Charles then revealed the deeper reason during their private conversation. The law was also an effort to correct the failures of earlier royal generations, when spouses often carried impossible burdens without protection, a voice, or recognized authority. William finally realized his father was not simply preparing him to rule. He was trying to ensure old mistakes would never be repeated. They left the room together, not as rivals divided by the throne, but as two men united by the same responsibility. Outside the palace, however, the country had already transformed their private understanding into something much larger. Their personal promise gave the law its emotional weight, but Britain's streets, newspapers, and broadcasters would shape how history remembered the king's extraordinary decision. By sunrise, the law was no longer a palace secret. It belonged to the nation. Newspapers across the country reported the historic change in different ways. Broadcasters interrupted regular programming, while crowds gathered outside royal residences despite no public appearance being announced. Britain was not mourning one reign or celebrating another. Instead, it was witnessing a monarch deliberately preparing the future before the crown required it. Charles remained king with full sovereign authority, but national broadcasters explained that the new law formally prepared William and Catherine to assume defined responsibilities before accession. Accession is the moment an heir legally becomes monarch, and the change meant the country would no longer face that transition with an unprepared future court. Constitutional commentators describe the measure as one of the clearest modern statements of royal continuity, emphasizing that it reinforced the established line of succession rather than changing it. One London newspaper reflected the public mood with a large photograph of Charles, signing the document beneath the headline, "The King secures the future." A smaller photograph showed William and Catherine leaving Kensington Palace together, their expressions calm but carrying the weight of the moment. Outside Buckingham Palace, an elderly woman holding a small Union flag spoke during a live broadcast. "He has given his son time to prepare, and that may be the kindest thing a king can do," she said. Her words quickly spread because they captured the emotion of the moment. Some critics argued the palace had begun William's reign too early, while others viewed the decision as an act of service rather than surrender. William then appeared beside Catherine in a televised message. The prince did not celebrate new power. He thanked his father for trusting them with responsibilities that would affect both the nation and their family. Catherine followed with a promise that they would carry the burden with humility, unity, and care. Her words were calm, but the cost was obvious. Their lives had become more public, their choices more limited, and their children more closely tied to the crown. Charles watched the statement in private. When Catherine acknowledged his courage, the king lowered his head for a moment, quietly moved that his sacrifice had finally been understood. That evening, Charles, Camilla, William, and Catherine prepared to appear together. Their positions would speak louder than any legal document. The country's reaction had already been heard, but one final image would define what Charles's signature truly meant for the monarchy. The lasting message came when the king stepped forward before the nation, with William and Catherine standing beside him. Charles had not surrendered the crown. William had not taken it. Catherine had not gained her place through ambition. Together, they represented something the monarchy had long struggled to achieve: a transition built on preparation instead of uncertainty, trust instead of rivalry. Charles remained the reigning sovereign, and nothing in the new law weakened his authority. Yet William and Catherine now stood beside him as the recognized guardians of what would come next. Before the cameras rolled, Charles quietly adjusted William's ceremonial insignia. The prince looked at his father, and the king answered with a simple nod before taking his place. No speech could have carried greater meaning. The future king was not replacing his father. He was being prepared by him. Camilla stood beside Charles with quiet composure, choosing unity as the family faced this historic moment together. Catherine carried a different burden. She knew the law had permanently changed her family's future, bringing every private choice closer to public duty. Yet, she accepted that responsibility because Charles had given her something royal spouses had rarely received: real authority, matched with real responsibility. William did not look triumphant. He looked prepared. Britain already knew he would one day become king. The true importance of the law was that Charles refused to leave the next reign unprepared, legally uncertain, or emotionally divided. Charles remained king. William became the fully empowered heir. Catherine was secured as the future queen. The monarchy stepped into its next chapter united, not divided. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more royal updates. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.